Hello boys and girls, I'm the Guide Knight and welcome to part 8 of my Godot tutorial of the 2D Breakout game. Last time we did add our dynamic level and this episode we're going to optimize a little bit the bricks so that they are a little bit more flexible, and we're gonna add a third type of bricks, which is basically the bricks that you cannot break. And if there is time in this episode, we're also going to try to add some sort of a win condition, a rudimentary win condition without anything fancy, but we will improve on that later on. So let's get right on to it. First of all, let's reduce the difficulty of our level to something easier. Let's say 1. Yeah, that's more like it. And I see that our sprite, our background sprite right now is a little bit out of bounds. So let's go to the dynamic level and fix it. The snap here is 16 pixels. So you just drag it like 32 pixels to the side, then 32 pixels more, basically 64, and here 32 to the side. So this should be exactly the same size as the world you save, and there you go. You can now drag and drop the level, and you know that basically you don't have anything outside of the bounds. Okay, so now let's go to the bricks. Like, how do we do that? Let me just copy the duplicate, like one of the bricks, and just call it brick, because we're gonna use only this brick.tsn file and not the other two. So and we're going to edit the script. What we want to do is basically reset the frames here, right? We don't want to have anything inside the animated frame. So if I add this brick anywhere, this won't be visible, but it should have a collision shape. And we're going to create another folder. Let's call it, let's just call it frames, right? In the bricks folder, because those are gonna be the frames we're gonna use for our bricks, right? So go here, right click, new folder, and then call it frames. And inside here, we're gonna add 3 different resources of type sprite frames. So let's call it blue frames or blue brick, I don't know, blue frames, blue brick frames. We have the blue brick frames, and we can click here. And basically, we can see the sprite frames here on the bottom. So if I go ahead and drag, I don't need to see the brick here, right? I just need to have the frames clicked. So I can drag and drop here my blue brick. And I'm gonna do the same for the other 2, right? So I'm gonna duplicate it, call it green brick frames. I'm going to make sure I have the green brick frame selected, and then I'm going to add first the hole, then the hit. I'm gonna save, make sure you save both, right? And then I'm gonna duplicate once more, and then I'm gonna call the gray brick frames, right? This is basically the one that you don't destroy. I'm gonna use the brick dark. It's gray or dark or whatever. Let's just call it dark brick frames, right? Because it is consistent with the name of the sprite. Dark brick frames. All right. So now we have those resources, but we don't actually use them anywhere, right? So saved. Okay. So what we need to do is go to our brick script here, and basically define 3 different variables for each of those frames, right? So we need like blue frames, then we will define like a green frames variable, green frames, and also finally dark frames variable. For this, we're going to preload the resource, right? So we're gonna use the preload keyword, and then preload, and then basically, as you already know, just drag and drop from the inspector to here, and I can copy this thing, Yeah, I can copy this and just do the same for the dark frames and for the green frames. So right now, I have the frames defined here, but as I am using the default frames in the bricks, this won't be visible at all. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that the brick can work with the different frames, right? We have defined the frames, and if you're wondering what the frames are, they are nothing else but actually those sprite frames, right? Here we have defined them manually, and right now we basically defined I don't know what that is. And right now we defined those frames inside the resources, and we preload the resources so we can swap them on the fly and make sure that the dark brick does only contain the dark brick and not the blue brick as I had it before. Yeah, so we need a way to initialize that, right? So we're going to use an enumeration. It's basically a constant with different values that translates roughly to an integer, like 1, 2, 3, 4, but with some names. So we're going to use an enumeration called frames, and then we're going to go with blue. That is the first value, and then green is the second value, and then dark is the basically third value, right? So now we have this, but we don't have a way to connect those. So we have to actually change the frames inside our animated sprite in order for us to see any effect, right? So let me maybe first go to the dynamic level and make sure that we only instantiate types like, let me just add another constant here. Or I can replace it, but I'm just gonna call it brick class, and this is gonna be simply the brick, right? And I would, instead of the blue brick, I will instantiate the, like the brick class, right? Just call it brick. And right now, if I start, this should be, yeah, frame count base is null. Okay, so we have a null pointer here, basically, because we don't have any frames, right? We didn't have set anything up here. So let us create a way to do it. So we're gonna create a function called change sprites or change frames, right? Like, let's call it change frames because we have frames everywhere. And then we're gonna use a switch statement, which in Godot looks like this, right? So basically you match the frame, but we don't have a frame variable, right? So let's create a frame variable. Or let's call it current frames. I don't know why I keep typing G instead of F, current frames. And we're gonna use frames.blue. This is basically the syntax for accessing those enumerations, right? You type in the enumeration name and then the enumeration value with the dot in like separate by a dot. So this is basically the blue value of the frames object or frames enumeration, so to say. So we can say, okay, we have match for current frames, and if this matches like frames.blue, we are going to go to our animated sprite and instantiate the frames there, or basically change the frames variable, right? We in the last episode we talked about the animated sprite and the frames variable. Let's check it again. Animated sprite here, and then there are the frames, and they are of type sprite frames, right? What we actually added as resource. So in theory, we should be able to change that directly inside here and say, okay, this will be equal to blue frames, right? And I can copy and paste this for the rest of the match statement. This is basically the syntax of a match statement. You just type match and then what you want to match, and then different values that it matches. Like, this could be also written with an if-else statement, but I think it's a little bit cleaner if you write it like that. So let's go with green frames, and then let's go with dark frames, right? And of course, we need to change the type here. Okay, so right now we have our current frames. It's set default to blue, but you can change it. And we can actually do that in the ready variable before we actually initialize the hit points, I guess. So we can say set frames, everything will be darker. So let's go with dark, right? Frames.dark and see, because it's easier to check if it actually works. Okay, what does it say? Too many arguments for change frames call. Okay, I don't, yeah, that's of course, current frames. Okay, I don't know, maybe we can just pass in the thing here and we don't need the variable. Let me check if it everything works, and we're gonna optimize it a little bit. This is also part of the process, you know. Nothing's perfect until you optimize it a little bit, and then it's not perfect as well. But yeah. All right, so what we have now, we have a lot of blue frames, right? But let's see if we can get dark frames. Will it work? Okay, now we have a lot of dark frames that act as basically blue frames. That's all right. That's quite all right. But what we would like to do is go to our dynamic level here and make sure we actually instantiate the brick here the same way. Like we have like the green brick and the blue brick, and right now we do have different types of bricks, but we can actually get rid of those because anyway we're sharing the brick GD script, and it is overwriting the animated sprite frames. Like if you're wondering, this won't work right now because I have a reference to the green brick. But if you're wondering right now why we are instantiating like green bricks and we only see dark ones, is because if you go to the green brick, you see that it uses basically the same structure as the normal brick, and it uses the same GD file. So this is the brick GD file, and in the brick GD file, in the ready function, we change the frames to dark. So this is why we overwrite the default for the green. So in order for us not to do that, we need to change our code a little bit. I already changed both to brick and removed the constants here. You can go ahead and do that if you haven't done it already. And here I would like to add like a way to call the brick, right? Like we need to call it and create it with the frame color, right? So we can actually call like frames dot blue, right? But there is a problem. There is a problem, and that the problem is that this frames is not inside this this GD script, right? It's here. So we need to somehow access that, and the way we can access this is via basically the class instance, right? So we can type brick.frames.blue, and this should work in theory, but it doesn't work because, you know why? Because we have not added a fourth parameter to our init brick. So let's call it brick frames and or type brick frames type, because this is basically the type, right? It could be called frames type or frames or whatever, and this is what it is. So let's initialize this with blue. I'm going to initialize this with green, the second one, and now we need to, like, before we add the child, because if you look at the documentation of the ready function, we can control and left click here, it is called when the node is ready. That is, when both the node and its children have entered the scene tree. So in order for us to initialize the object, we need to make sure all its properties are correctly set. The properties of the brick are the frames, the sprite frames for the animation animated sprite, right? So if we add it, we risk like having a concurrent concurrent exception or some issue where the object is actually added to the scene, but the change frames is not yet called. And you saw before, if we code this, we actually when we try to get the frames count, we get an error because the frames object is void. It's null, it's not there. So in order for us to like circumvent this problem or solve it without actually encountering it, we need to actually call the set, we need to call the change frames basically before we add the object to the scene tree. So we basically have it here, it's initialized, but it's not yet in the scene tree. And as we saw from the ready function documentation, it will be called when the object enters the scene tree. So if we change the frames before we add it to the scene, which is in this add child, we should be fine, right? Should be fine. That's the theory. So let's try it out. So if I can now pass in the brick frame type, and in theory, if everything works, I should see green and blue frames as before. And of course, there is something wrong here. Okay. Invalid set index frames on base null with value type sprite frames. All right. Now this is another problem. So the problem basically is that we're trying to code this before everything is initialized, but of course the animated sprite can be initialized only. It can be basically initialized on ready. So it's an object that needs to be added to the scene tree, and right now this object is null because basically it's not ready, right? When we're calling this a little bit prematurely. So in order for us to basically fix this problem as well, we are going to go back to our current frames variable, and we are going to basically say current frames equals frames, right? And we're going to say like set frames. So right now, our change frames function will be without any parameters, and we will expect this to be called in the ready, right? We expect this to be called in the ready, and there it will use what is the value of our variable. So the set frames we need to call before ready, and the change frames we need to call on ready. So it's a little bit maybe difficult to understand or like follow, but basically what we're doing is we are telling the script, okay, those are your frames, and the script then does nothing. It just remembers the frames, and when the object initializes, it already knows the frames and initializes them that way. So let's see if this small change will work. So set frames. So right now, before we add the brick to the scene, we set the frames, and it will change the this local variable, which I will basically put on top. And yeah, I think I will put this here as well. So like that. Maybe the enumeration I will put on below already. I don't know. I just like to group them. So right now we will initialize the frames, and on ready this will call it, and things should work. Let's see, fingers crossed. All right, so now we have our green and blue bricks, and you notice that they actually retain their behavior from before. Like the green brick has like 2 lives, and the blue brick has basically 1 life. If I can hit the blue brick, that's great, right? So let's also add our third type of brick, right? We can extend this a little bit, and let's say, okay, this is I don't know if it's random. If the random is below 0.9, we're gonna add this, and else we're gonna add a normal gray brick, right? Else, and then I can just copy and paste, and then I just go dark, right? Okay, brick row dark. All right. So now we also have dark bricks, and those bricks actually behave the same way as blue bricks. If we hit them, if I can hit one, it will disappear immediately because it has 1 life, and this is right now what we expect. but we'd like for them to be like indestructible, right? That's what we wanted to have. So let's add those. We can do that in many different ways. One of the ways to actually increase the hit points indefinitely. Another way is to make sure that the brick is indestructible. So let's like this is we're gonna add here a variable called indestructible. This is when we initialize the brick. And here we're gonna say, okay, this is not indestructible, this is not indestructible, and this one is indestructible, right? This is indestructible. And here we will add a function called set indestructible, and then indestructible, right? We don't have this function implemented yet, so let's implement it. And basically we can add here a variable, like variable indestructible. It will be by default, let's say it's default false, because maybe that's the normal way, right? And then we're going to add the function called set indestructible. Set indestructible, and then value, basically. I think we can keep value everywhere for setters. Basically, it's a little bit more consistent. And then we can say this indestructible equals value, right? And this thing right now doesn't do anything unless we basically go here. So if indestructible, return, right? So we don't basically want to change the hit points and change the animation and everything. So let us go to the dynamic level and basically like comment out those. I think it is Control K, the shortcut for multi-line comment. And right now we only add dark bricks. Okay, what says? Non-existent function set indestructible in static body 2D. Didn't I just add it? Maybe I have a typo. Okay. I think I have a typo, but I think the typo is here. Okay. So right now we're gonna only have like dark bricks, and you see that they are all very much indestructible. And if we comment it in, basically remove the comments again with Control K, you can see that right now we have all sorts of bricks, and yeah, you can destroy some of them, and some of them you cannot even hit because you are. I hope you're better at this than me. So yeah, there we go. It got hit but didn't get destroyed, right? So that's it for the indestructible bricks. And I guess, guys, this is it for this lesson. I don't want to like make it too long. In the next lesson, we're gonna finally add our end condition. I mean our win condition, and maybe even add some rudimentary menus, like where you can like restart the game and so on. Maybe this will be next episode. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, and you can also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And feel free to leave me any comment, feedback, or anything. That would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much, guys. Stay safe, stay cool, stay awesome, as I know you are. Bye-bye.